20.1 Economic Inequality. This chapter covers distribution of income, income Lorenz curve, distribution of wealth, wealth or income, inequality over time, economic mobility, poverty incidence and trends, poverty duration. Economic inequality in the United States. To measure economic inequality, we look at the distribution of income and wealth. The most commonly used measure of economic inequality is the distribution of annual income. A household's income is the amount it receives in a given period. The Census Bureau defines income as money income, which equals market income plus cash payments to households by government. Market income equals wages, rents, interest, and profit earned in factor markets before paying income taxes. A household's wealth is the value of the things it owns at a point in time. Wealth is measured as a market value of the household's home, stocks, and bond it owns, and the money in the bank account minus its debt, such as outstanding credit balances. To describe the distribution of income, imagine the population of the United States lined up from the lowest to the highest income earner. Now divide the line into 5 equal sized groups, each with the 20% of the population. These groups are called quintiles. In 2009, the poorest 20% of households received 3.4% of total income. The second poorest 20% received 8.6%. The middle 20% received 14.6%. The next highest 20% received 23.2%. And the highest 20% received 50.2%. Figure shows a distribution of annual income across the 117.5 million households in the United States in 2009. Note that the x-axis measures the household income and the y-axis is percentage of households. The most common household income, called the mode income, was received by the 6% of the households whose income fell between $20,000 and $25,000. The value of $22,000 marked on the figure is an estimate. The mid-level of household income in 2009, called the median income, was $49,777. 50% of households have an income that exceeds the median and 50% have an income below the median. The average household money income in 2009, called the mean income, was $67,976. This number equals total household income, about $8 trillion, divided by the 117.5 million households. The income distribution in figure is called a positively skewed distribution, which means that it has a long tail of high values. This distribution contrasts with the bell that describes the distribution of people's heights. In a bell-shaped distribution, the mean, median, and mode are all equal. You can see in figure that the mode is less than the median and the median is less than the mean. This feature of the distribution of income tells us that there are more households with low income than with high incomes. It also tells us that some of the high incomes are very high. The income Lorenz curve. The income Lorenz curve graphs the cumulative percentage of income against the cumulative percentage of households. The table shows the percentage of income of each quintile group. For example, row A tells us that the lowest quintile of households received 3.4% of total income. The table also shows percentage of households and income. For example, row B tells us that the lowest 2 quintiles, lowest 40% of households, receives 12% of total income, that is 3.4% for the lowest quintile plus 8.6% for the next lowest. The Lorenz curve provides direct visual clue about the degree of income inequality by comparing it to the line of equality. This line, identified in figure, shows what the Lorenz curve would be if everything had the same level of income. If income were distributed equally across all the households, each quintile would receive 20% of total income, and the cumulative percentage of income received would equal the cumulative percentage of household. So the Lorenz curve would be the straight line labeled line of equality. The actual distribution of income shown by the curve labeled income Lorenz curve can be compared with the line of equality. The closer the Lorenz curve is to the line of equality, the more equal is the distribution of income. The distribution of wealth. The distribution of wealth provides another way of measuring economic inequality. The household's wealth is the value of the things that it owns at a point in time. In contrast, income is the amount that the household receives over a given period of time. Wealth is extremely unequally distributed. For this reason, the data are grouped by seven unequal group of households. The poorest is 40% of households own only 0.2% of the total wealth. Row A1 in the table in figure. The richest 20% of households own 83.4% of total wealth. Because this group owns almost all the wealth, we need to break the group into smaller parts. That is what row D dash through G dash do. The richest 1% of households in row G dash own 38.1% of total wealth. Figure shows the income Lorenz curve alongside the wealth Lorenz curve. You can see that the Lorenz curve for wealth is much farther away from the line of equality than is the Lorenz curve for income, which means that the distribution of wealth is much more unequal than the distribution of income. The cumulative percentage of wealth is graphed against the cumulative percentage of households. Point A dash through G dash on the Lorenz curve for wealth correspond to the rows of the table. By comparing the Lorenz curves for income and wealth, we can see that wealth is distributed much more unequally than is income. Wealth or income. We have seen that wealth is much more unequally distributed than in is income. Which distribution provides a better description of the degree of inequality? To answer this question, we need to think about the connection between wealth and income. Wealth is a stock of assets, and income is a flow of earnings that results from the stock of wealth. Suppose that a person owns asset worth $1 million, then has a wealth of $1 million. The rate of return on asset is for 5% a year, then this person receives an income of $50,000 a year from those assets. We can describe this person's economic condition by using either the wealth of $1 million or the income of $50,000. When the rate of return is 5% a year, $1 million of wealth equals $50,000 of income in perpetuity. Wealth and income are just different ways of looking at the same thing. But in figure, the distribution of wealth is more unequal than the distribution of income. Why? It is because the wealth data do not include the value of the human capital, while the income data measure income from all wealth, including human capital. Think about Lee and Peter, two people with equal income and equal wealth. Lee's wealth is human capital and his entire income is from employment. Peter's wealth is in the form of investments in stocks and bonds, and his entire income is from these investments. When a Census Bureau agent interviews Lee and Peter in a national income and wealth survey, their incomes are recorded as being equal. But Lee's wealth is recorded as zero, while Peter's wealth is recorded as the value of his investments. Peter looks vastly more wealthy than Lee in the survey data. Because the National Survey of Wealth excludes human capital, the income distribution is a more accurate measure of economic inequality than the wealth distribution. Inequality over time. US income inequality has increased. The highest income has increased faster than the lower income, and the gap between rich and poor has widened. Figure shows this widening gap by looking at the income share of each quintile between 1970 and 2012. The data are based on money income. In the figure from 1970 to 2012, the income share received by the highest quintile rose from 43% to 51%. The shares received by the other quintiles fell. The lowest quintile share fell from 4% to 3%, the second lowest from 11% to 8%, and the middle from 17% to 14%. Economic mobility. Economic mobility is the movement of a family from up or down through the income distribution. If there were no economic mobility, a family would be struck at a given point of income distribution and be persistently poor or rich or somewhere in the middle. Also, in such a situation, the data on annual income distribution would be a good indicator of lifetime inequality. If there is economic mobility, families move up or down through the income distribution, and lifetime inequality is not as severe as in the inequality in the data for a single year. How much economic mobility is there? Catherine Bradbury and Jane Cutts, economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, have provided answers to this question. The figure shows what they found. In the figure, over a decade, about 30% of families move up a quintile or more, and a similar percentage move down a quintile or more. Between 35 to 40% of families remain in the same quintile. Mobility through the quintiles has decreased over in the 1980s and 1990s. What is the source of economic mobility? Most of it arises from the normal changes over a family's life cycle. Families experience income growth as their workers become more skilled and experienced. As families continues to get older and its workers retire, its income falls. If you look at three households that have identical lifetime incomes that are economically equal, but one is young, one is middle aged, and one is old, you will see a great deal of inequality. Inequality of annual incomes overstates the degree of lifetime inequality. Poverty. Households at the low end of the income distribution are so poor that they are considered to be living in poverty. Poverty is a situation in which a household's income is too low to be able to buy the quantities of food, shelter, and clothing that are deemed necessary. Poverty is a relative concept. Millions of people living in Africa and Asia survive on incomes of less than $400 a year. In the United States, poverty level is calculated each year by the Social Security Administration. In 2009, the poverty level for a four-person household was an income of $21,756. In that year, 44 million Americans, 14% of the population, lived in households that had incomes below the poverty level. Many of these households benefited from Medicare and Medicaid, two government programs that aid the poorest households and lift some of them above the poverty level. In 2012, the poverty level for a household with two adults and two children was an income of $23,283. In 2012, 46.5 million Americans had incomes below the poverty level. Figure shows the distribution of poverty by race in 2012. Almost one half, 41% of people living in poverty are white. Poverty incidence and trends. To measure the incidence of poverty, we look at the poverty rate, the percentage of families living in poverty. In 2012, the poverty rate was 15.2%. Figure shows the poverty rates and the trends for white, black, and Hispanic families from 1970 through 2012. For white families, the poverty rate has fluctuated around 10%. For black families, the poverty rate fell from 35% to 1983 to 24% in 2008, but the rate had increased to 27% by 2012. For Hispanic families, the poverty rate increased during the 1980s and then decreased during the 1990s. By 2006, the poverty rate for this group had fallen to a low of 20%. But during the years after 2006, the Hispanic poverty rate steadily increased, and by 2012, it had reached 27%. Poverty duration. Another dimension of poverty is its duration. If a household is in poverty for a few months, it faces serious hardship during those months, but it faces a less serious problem than it would if the poverty persisted for several months or yet for several years or even generations. Because the duration of poverty is an important additional indicator of the hardship that poverty brings, the Census Bureau provided measures of duration for the year 2001 and 2003. Figure shows this data. Almost 50% of the people who fall below the poverty level remain in that state for 2 to 4 months. More than 20% of the people who fall below the poverty level remain in that state for more than a year. So seriously, large number of households experience chronic poverty.